In this episode, I'll share with you the 10 mistakes I've made when I was still a traditional leader and what I've learned doing instead. So tune in for this episode and find out if maybe you're making the same mistakes as I've made. And my name is Murielle, and I help leaders build meaningful lives and organizations. Now, my first biggest mistake comes because I used to be a good student. And so I tried to deliver everything that was expected from me. And I did that because in school, that was the way to good grades. So if I did everything that was expected from me, I would get good grades. If I didn't, I would be punished with bad grades. So this is a habit that is deeply ingrained in me and that has served me very well in school, but also in my early career, because I got promoted if I could deliver. And so this was really deeply ingrained in me. But because of all the things that I had to do and the fact that requests were coming from everywhere, from email, from meetings, from people I didn't know, from friends, from my family, from colleagues, in meetings, WhatsApp, I had requests coming from everywhere. But also the tasks I had to deliver were less and less delimited. Making a video, I could always improve it. I could always do more research for a project. I could always align more. So I had to define when I would stop. And so trying to deliver everything that was expected from me in a very good way was not possible anymore. It almost led to me burning out. So what I had to learn instead was to focus. And focus meant saying no to people, saying no to opportunities, and saying no to threats. But that wasn't something that I had learned because I felt very uncomfortable when I said no to somebody or when I said no to something, because I had the feeling that I wasn't delivering what was expected from me and that maybe I would get punished for that. So I don't know about you, just look at your habits. Are you still trying to deliver everything that is expected from you? Or is it already very easy for you to focus, to say no, and to let go of all the things that you couldn't deliver, and to be okay with disappointing people? So the second mistake I was making was that I worked very hard and that I became really good in managing my time. Because like I said, I had more and more things to do, and I had more and more expectations coming from my shareholders, from my management, from headquarters, from my employees. So I had all these things to do. And so what I first did, instead of focusing, was that I tried to manage my time better and better. So I took courses about time management. I took the course Getting Things Done, which is really great. And so I became really good at managing my time. It even became better when I became a mother, because I had also to manage all the things of my family, of my kids, on top of the things I had to manage at work. So I became this really queen of time management, and everything was scheduled almost to the minute. You should have seen my calendar. Everything was scheduled, and I was really, really good in juggling and in holding all these balls in the air. But what was happening is, in working this hard and in managing my time, I slowly started to lose my energy. And because I didn't have this energy anymore, I was starting to make mistakes. I was starting to also resist some changes. I wasn't learning new things. And I started to get in this vicious circle where I was losing more and more of my energy, making mistakes. I had to correct these mistakes, had even more to do, started to manage my time even better. But in the process, I completely lost my energy and almost burned out. And so what I had to learn to do instead, and I realized this especially when I was the CEO of an organization in the middle of a digital transformation, I had to manage my energy first. And it became, in fact, my number one job to manage my energy. because I was facing all these challenges. I had to focus and to learn saying no to things. And I couldn't do that if I was exhausted and stressed. But when I had energy, that's when I could tackle a lot of challenges. That's when I could handle a lot of bad news. That's also when I had the most creative ideas. That's when I could get out of my comfort zone and learn new skills, like, for instance, focusing and not delivering everything that was expected from me. So instead of working hard and managing my time, I had to learn to manage my energy instead. It became my number one job as a CEO. And now, as a manager or as a CEO of a startup, it still is my number one job. Whatever I do, I will always first manage my energy. If I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do anymore, what to start anymore, or if I'm having bad thoughts because I think I'm not good enough, or I'm going to fail, or if I have failed and I'm having bad thoughts because of that, in the past, I would take action, I would put a lot of things in place and manage my time very well. Now, when I notice it, because I still make mistakes, but when I notice it, I will stop everything and manage my energy first. And with this high energy, I will start seeing new possibilities, I will start being creative, and I will have the energy to tackle whatever I face and to put the best actions in place. So what about you? Are you very good in managing your time? Or are you better in managing your energy before your time? So I'm not saying that you shouldn't manage your time anymore. You still have to do that. But first, manage your energy. My third mistake was that I was mainly action-oriented. So when I saw something that wasn't working very well, I would do something about it. I would take action. When I saw an opportunity, I would do something about it. So I'm very action-oriented. But the problem was that sometimes I was in this loop where whatever action I was taking, I didn't get the result that I wanted. And that was because being action-oriented wasn't enough anymore. I had to learn to manage my interpretations or my mindset or my beliefs, whatever you want to call it, before my actions. And that was really crucial because in these fast-changing digital times or in these disruptive times, sometimes things are changing drastically. And if I was still viewing my market with my old mindset, I couldn't see some actions that were possible for me in front of me. So I really had to learn to manage my mindset, my interpretations of situations, or my beliefs before my actions. And that's when I suddenly saw possibilities that were not visible to me before. And let me illustrate this with an example from the music industry. At some point in the music industry, people were downloading music illegally. And the traditional players, their interpretation was that people were stealing music. And everything that they put in place was based on that interpretation. They started having actions of shutting down platforms, lawsuits, sensibilization campaigns, but they still didn't get the result they wanted. Their revenues kept declining. Then you had other players like Apple, Spotify, Deezer, with the same fact, people are downloading music illegally. They saw another interpretation. They saw that people wanted a music experience. And with that interpretation, they had other actions in place. They started these platforms that we all know today, like iTunes, Spotify, and Deezer, and they increased their revenues. Same facts, different interpretations, different actions, and different results. And so we should always learn to manage our mindset, our interpretations before our actions, and be really aware of the things that might stand in our way and that we are not yet seeing. So how about your mindset? Do you believe that you have the mindset that will help you reach the outcomes that you want. And what about your organization? So I have a video about how you can manage your mindset. Just go there to watch that video if you want it. Now, my fourth mistake was that I wasn't aware of my habits. So I think it's 95 or maybe 98% of what we do is out of habit. And as I told you at the beginning of this episode, my habits that had served me very well in the past, like being action-oriented, managing my time, doing everything that is expected from me, and the 3 mistakes that I talked about in the beginning of this episode, well, those habits that were now standing in the way of my own success. But the problem was that I wasn't aware of these habits at first. And when you're not aware of your habits, then you are not at choice. How can you choose to change your habits if you don't even know that these are habits that you have? For instance, as soon as somebody asks you something, you immediately say yes, because otherwise you might disappoint that person, or you might not be seen as a very friendly or helpful person. Well, that habit might stand in the way of your success. Or maybe you have a habit like being enthusiastic about new things. And so every time you have a new opportunity, you want to seize that opportunity. But then you don't manage to finish things very well. And so maybe that is a habit that you should change as well. So I wasn't aware of my habits. So what I had to do instead was observe myself and really analyze what were the habits that I had. And were these habits serving me now or standing in the way of my success? And some of the habits that I have are still serving me, but not in all situations. So I really have to be aware of my habits, of the situation I'm in, and what habits do I want to carefully build to be successful in the future. So the 5th mistake that I was making as a manager or as a leader was that I worked mainly on strategy. So we made these great plans, we made these great action plans, defined a strategy, and then we would implement it and everything would be okay. But of course, it wasn't the case, because what was happening is that we didn't have the appropriate culture in our organization to really implement our strategy very well. And as the culture is the sum of the habits of everyone in the organization, we had to change the habits of everyone in the organization, starting with mine. So instead of mainly working on strategy, which I know is a mistake that a lot of managers are making, they're working on action plans, on strategy, on projects, but they don't work enough on culture and people. And we often hear the sentence, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but as the culture is the sum of the habits of the people in your organization, it's the habits that will eat your strategy for breakfast. So I had to learn to work and to spend a lot of my time and energy on changing the culture of my organization. And if you are a team leader, you should do that as well. Change the culture of your team. And if you are an individual leader without a team, you should work on changing your habits before only working on strategy. So what I had to do instead was work on the culture of my organization before working on the strategy. And I've already told this story in another episode, but I will shortly tell it. During the transformation of my organization when I was a CEO, my shareholders, they wanted to sell the organization. And so twice I had my biggest competitors who wanted to buy us. And so twice I had to tell them our whole strategy. Every plan we had, every financial result we had, every analysis we've made, we had to share everything with them. So they knew when we were going to launch something, how we were going to do it, what were the steps to achieve that, and then they didn't buy us. And it felt like playing poker with only my cards on the table. And still, we reached better results than our competitors. They knew everything, but they didn't have the appropriate culture to implement our plans fast enough. So we could win because we had worked a lot on changing the culture. So how about you and how about your organization? Are you working mainly on strategy, on processes, on plans, on projects? Or are you also spending a lot of time working on people, habits, and on your culture? And that is what I teach in my programs. I help leaders and I help organizations change the culture within their organization. And with that new culture, they have the foundation to really implement their plans very rapidly and to become really agile and to be able to seize much more opportunities than their competitors. So work on your culture. Then my sixth mistake was that I spoke a lot to convince people. Because in the past, in the organizations I had worked in, the meetings were very chaotic. So we had meetings to talk about projects or processes, but these were very chaotic. And if I didn't speak, I wasn't listened to. And so I had learned to really speak a lot and to convince people. But unfortunately, at a certain point, I realized that the problems that we had to solve became more complex. And I couldn't solve them by myself anymore. We really needed a team to solve these issues. And what are the best functioning teams? Those are the teams where you have psychological safety. But to have psychological safety, research shows that you have to give equal speaking time to everyone in your team and also to show empathy. And so instead of talking a lot to convince people, I had to learn to listen instead. And by listening, that's how we got the best ideas, because maybe some people that were not used to be listened to, they had really valid things to say and to add to our plans. So I really had to learn to listen instead of talk a lot to convince. So how good are you at listening? Or when was the last time you were listened to? Or the last time you deeply listened to somebody? And what about the meetings in your organization? Are people listening to each other, or are the meetings very chaotic? And if you don't speak out loud, then you're not being listened to. And we even had to implement different methodologies and ways of working so that we could all be listened to instead of having these chaotic meetings where everyone talks and talks. So things like a World Cafe, or like taking turns in talking for 2 minutes, or collaborative tools. Now, the seventh mistake that I was making was that I solved issues too rapidly. Because probably like you, I hate issues and I hate problems. And when I face a problem, usually I really feel bad. And I feel bad somewhere in my body, and I have like a compressed chest. I might have a knot in my throat. I have tensed shoulders. I really feel bad when I face an issue, when I think I'm going to fail. And so I want to escape this feeling. And because I want to escape this feeling, the habit that I had was that I solved issues too rapidly. Because then I would get rid of the issue and I would feel good again in my body and in my mind. But the problem was that I was solving these issues too rapidly. And so instead of working on root causes, I was only solving symptoms. And that was how I started working really very operationally. And issues kept coming up. New issues or the same issues came up again. And that's how I become really this firefighter, working very hard on solving a lot of issues, but without really working strategically. So instead of solving issues too rapidly, what I had to learn to do instead was stop and analyze the root causes of an issue and solve the root causes instead of solving only the symptoms of that issue. So just look at yourself for a second. Do you take the time to stop, to analyze an issue, to work on solving the root causes and only then act? Or do you want to get rid of the issues as fast as possible and work mainly operationally? And I see that happening a lot in organizations today. A lot of leaders, they're running from one meeting to the other, from one task to the other, only working operationally. And they're not taking the time anymore to pause, to step back, and to analyze things. And it doesn't have to take that much time. And in fact, in the end, you will save time because you will have less and less issues to face. And then my 8th mistake was that I was working on improving my weaknesses. Because in my evaluations, every year the same things came up. And it was really strange because I'm really good at thinking out of the box. I'm really good at having these creative ideas, in doing things differently, but I'm not very good in following processes, rules, and structures. And so every year on my evaluation, I would get the notification that I should improve that weakness. But then I noticed that when I was improving my weaknesses that were in fact going along with my strengths, I was becoming an average manager. And so that's when I realized that not only me, but everyone in the organization should work on building their strengths and then collaborate for the weaknesses. For instance, if I would work with a colleague that is very detail-oriented, very well in planning an implementation, with my ideas that are out of the box and really challenging the status quo, we would form a great team and reach great results. But when you try to push everyone to improve the weaknesses, you get average people and you get average teams. So that's when I realized I should keep improving my strengths and collaborating on my weaknesses. So what about you? Are you working on improving your weaknesses or do you collaborate for these weaknesses? And the 9th mistake that I was making was that I wanted to control everything and avoid chaos at all costs. I hate chaos because it makes me feel like I don't have control over the things. But what I had to learn was if I wanted to focus, for instance, it meant saying no to things. And when I said no to these things or when I was ignoring some things, they would not solve themselves magically. They would generate chaos that I had to learn to accept. And so ironically, it's by learning to let go and accept this chaos that I got more control over my life and over my results. So it's really ironic. I had to learn to let go to be able to have better results and more control over the situation. But the problem is that it was very hard for me to let go. And that is because you cannot let go mentally. Just think about it. When somebody just says to you, relax, just let go, it will go away. Often it doesn't work. For me, at least, it makes me even more tensed. So instead, how can you learn to let go? It's by letting go through your body. Because when you have a relaxed body, because you have been exercises, you had a massage, you had a good laugh, you went on holiday, that's when it becomes easy to let go. Then you don't care as much about things that seemed so important to you before. So instead of controlling everything, I had to learn to let go. And by learning to let go, I was a choice. I could choose to control or to let go. And a lot of leaders, they don't have that choice. And because they cannot let go, they control all the time, and they cannot focus, and they cannot be successful in these fast-changing digital times. So how about you? Are you trying to control everything, or are you able to let go? Now, and the last mistake that I've made, well, I've made, of course, even more mistakes than these, but these were the 10 I wanted to focus on in this episode. The last mistake that I was making is that I was showing strength in all situations. I had always been, I think I'm very strong, but I always had this idea that as a leader or as a person, I had to show strength in all situations. And so I had become this superwoman that would never show weakness, that everything was always under control, everything was okay, I was going to handle this. And by showing up as this superhuman woman, I was alienating my colleagues from me. They couldn't connect to me anymore. And not only that, but it was only a mask that I was wearing, because the more I was wearing this mask of this superwoman, that everything was okay, the more I felt that inside something was not working anymore. I wasn't connected to myself anymore and to what I deeply cared about. It was like I was on this autopilot. Everything is going to be okay. I'm going to handle this. Don't show your weaknesses. And so this wasn't working anymore in these fast-changing digital times, because people didn't feel connected to me anymore. I really had the feeling that I had to take all the responsibility on my shoulders as a leader, and that way I would protect the people in my team and in my organization. But it wasn't working, because first of all, it was very heavy to take all that responsibility on my shoulders. It was really, really heavy, and I had meetings, or I had coaching sessions with my coach where I realized that I couldn't continue like this anymore. It was too heavy. But on top of that, it wasn't working, because all I was doing was alienating the team members, and they weren't following me anymore and my vision. They didn't believe in me anymore, because I was showing up as this superhuman that I wasn't. And they couldn't relate to me anymore. So what I had to learn to do instead was to show my vulnerability. And to just say, I don't know. To just say, we have this issue, I don't know how I'm going to solve this or how we are going to solve this, but I know I will find an answer. So I showed my vulnerability, and ironically, here again, it's when I managed to show my vulnerability that people started really to follow me and to follow my vision. But also it was, for me, showing my vulnerability required more courage than simply showing my superwoman mask. So I had to learn to show my vulnerability, to just tell how I felt, to just say to people, this is how I feel. I don't feel well. I feel like quitting, but I won't quit. It's going to be okay. I know we will be able to solve this, but for the moment, I feel sad. I feel like I want to give up, and I'm going to work on my energy before coming back to you with a plan, or with a plan that we're going to work on together, of course. So I had to learn to show my vulnerability to become stronger as a leader. So I wonder, how good are you in showing your vulnerability to your colleagues at work, or even maybe to your family and your friends? Because I wasn't even showing my vulnerability to my friends anymore, because I had the feeling that if I would show that, it would crack and everything would fall down. And it didn't happen. Yeah, when I started doing it, of course it was hard in the beginning. I cried a lot. I even cried at work, but this made me human and made people really want to follow me and my vision, because they realized I was simply human and doing my best, and they could be human as well and do their best as well. Nobody has to be perfect because perfection is boring and it's not even possible. So these were the 10 mistakes that I had made when I was still a traditional leader. And I have to admit this, I'm still making these mistakes at times. I'm far from being perfect today. And I'm just going to go over these 10 mistakes again. So the first one was I was trying to deliver everything that was expected from me instead of focusing. The second one was that I worked hard and managed my time instead of managing my energy. The third one was that I was mainly action-oriented instead of learning to stop and manage my mindset, my interpretations, my beliefs before my actions. The fourth one was that I wasn't aware of my habits. So what I had to do instead was observe myself and be aware of the habits that were not serving me anymore and build new habits. The fifth mistake was that I worked mainly on strategy and tasks and to-dos and processes and projects, but not enough on culture and people. The sixth mistake was that I convinced a lot by talking, and I had to learn to listen instead. The seventh mistake is that I solved issues too rapidly, and I had to learn to stop, take a step back, and analyze things instead. And I could only do that by learning to accept what I was feeling when I was facing these issues. The eighth mistake is that I worked mainly on improving my weaknesses instead of working on improving my strengths and collaborating for those weaknesses. Number 9 was that I tried to control everything and instead I had to learn to let go. And the last one was that I showed strength in all situations instead of showing my vulnerability. So what are the mistakes you are making and what is the habit that you would like to work on first? In my next episode, I will talk about your motivation. What if you have lost your motivation at work? Should you then quit and find a new job? Or is there maybe something that you could do instead of quitting? So I'm going to share with you how you could find your motivation back at work. So subscribe to this channel if you want to receive the next episode automatically, and also subscribe if you want to have a meaningful life and organization.